With the help of modern science and advances in technology, it often seems as though our society has found the answer to every question and the solution to every problem. However, there still exist a number of infamous mysteries which defy all logic and reason. From the far-flung corners of the earth, these enigmas continue to vex experts and call into question the nature of our reality. I'm Dash Finley, an avid fan of all things horror, and I'm here to guide you all on this journey as we seek the truth behind mysteries ranging from the criminal to the supernatural and beyond. Mysteries that can as of now only be classified as unsolved. My guest today is Hadley Mears, a prominent writer and historian. She's a contributor to Curbed, Atlas Obscura, LA Weekly, and others, and leads historical tours for Obscura Society LA, as well as being a chronicler of all things strange and mysterious in the City of Angels. In the middle of February 2013, the historic Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles began receiving complaints that the drinking water coming out of its tap was a strange, dark color, tasted weird, and had a funny odor. One guest in particular griped of an awful shower where the water ran black for several seconds before returning to normal. After almost 2 weeks of similar grievances, a hotel maintenance worker was sent to investigate the Cecil's 4 1,000-gallon water tanks located on the hotel's roof. When he opened one of the tanks, something awaited him that he could not have foreseen: the naked, water-bloated body of a guest who had gone missing from the Cecil weeks earlier. A 21-year-old student visiting from Canada named Elisa Lam. The cause of death was ruled as an accidental drowning by the Los Angeles Police Department. Elisa, they concluded, had climbed into the tank while in the throes of a manic episode brought on by a previously diagnosed case of bipolar disorder for which she was taking 4 different medications. But, like many things in life, this particular incident proved not to be as straightforward as it seemed. Just days before her lifeless body was discovered, the LAPD released the last known footage of Elisa in an appeal to the public to help find her. The 4-minute tape was from the hotel elevator video surveillance system and showed Elisa alone, late on the night she disappeared, acting in an incredibly bizarre and erratic manner. She ducks her head in and out of the stopped elevator multiple times. At one point, she appears to be hiding, crouched in a corner. At another, she seems to be talking frantically with someone just outside the elevator doors. Within hours of the video's release, it went viral and has continued to fascinate hordes of internet truth seekers worldwide. Many who have delved deep into the case's chilling details have called it one of the more mysterious incidents of the 21st century. If the death of this lovely young woman with so much to live for had occurred almost anywhere else, the explanation of mental illness having driven another unfortunate victim to an early end would probably have been received more readily by the public. But Elisa met her end at the famous, many would say infamous, Cecil, a hotel that since its opening in 1927 has seen at least 15 non-natural deaths by murder, suicide, or accident. Some of these cases are still unsolved, and more than one is tangled up in a set of incredibly morbid circumstances. Some call the hotel haunted, others call it cursed, or at the very least extremely unlucky. Whatever the truth, the Cecil Hotel, it would seem, is here to stay in horror lore. Today I am joined by Hadley Mears, a journalist, author, and tour guide for Atlas Obscura. She specializes in the dark and mysterious side of Los Angeles, let's say. Does that sound accurate to you?
I think so, in the history of Los Angeles, kind of in general.
In general, okay. Well, today we're certainly going to be tapping into the sort of more sinister and mysterious side of things. So I want to dive right into my questions here. You recently wrote a very in-depth article that delves into the history of some of LA's various suicide hotspots.
Right.
Okay, from the Colorado Street Bridge to the Hollywoodland, now Hollywood, sign. What do you think it is about Los Angeles that attracts this kind of a negative energy and may have drummed up a rash of suicides in its earlier days?
Well, I think one of the big things you have to remember about early LA history is that from kind of the 19th century on, people were coming here to escape lives that didn't make them happy back home. And especially in the late 19th century, early 20th century, people were sold on this idea that California was the land of sunshine, where the ill could get well, where the poor could get rich, where the ignored could become famous. And so people come out here. You see that, think about it, the gold rush.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, this was supposed to be this land of like bounty and promise.
Frontier.
Yeah. The grand frontier, the great manifest destiny of being an American. And then you get out here, and there's not that many jobs, and you don't find gold, and you still have tuberculosis. And
this is all checking out for me.
You don't have a family, you don't have a support system. The government didn't do as much, reaching out to people as we'd like to believe they do now. And so people were really lost. And so I think that the energy was not a supernatural, more than a circumstance of people being desperate and being alone. And you don't have the money to get back to wherever you came from.
Right.
So you're totally just hopeless and lost.
Unfortunately, I think that applies to a lot of LA today as well.
No,
sadly.
I think that's the story of Los Angeles, is like people searching for something.
Yeah.
It's kind of this epic, ever going, kind of Don Quixote
right.
search for the impossible dream.
Right.
And we just keep selling them that it can happen.
It is.
And
tragic.
it can.
It can.
It
It can. But you can also plunge from the Hollywood land
right.
sign and other similarly tragic things. But it is interesting. I mean, I guess most of the things you touched on occurred from 1910s to 1960s, probably. Certainly during an era of old Hollywood glamour and the like. So maybe that somehow factored into it as well.
That could, and especially with the kind of rash of people jumping off buildings that I found during that era, it seems like, when you think about it, the 20s is really the first time you start having all these amazing structures that you can look up to. So they physically, you can physically look up to them, and they're physically amazing, and they dwarf you as a person. So it kind of makes total sense that for someone who's out of options, for someone who says, screw it, I'm just going to go to this bridge and jump off, that's where they would go. And especially you also have the media becoming such a big thing at this time. And the LA Times, the LA Examiner, they were yellow journalism.
Right.
Even in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. They had their sides, they had their spin on thing, and they loved to promote dark stuff.
Yes.
This was a town who loved film noir even before film noir existed. And they wanted to report that the Colorado Street Bridge was the suicide bridge. I mean, they're the ones basically who coined the phrase. They wanted to report on the Cecil Hotel's mysterious goings on. So I think that also, if you know about somewhere and you're desperate and you want to kill yourself, well, why not become part of the story and part of the legend and go to that place to take your life?
It's exploitative in a way.
Oh, it's totally
stands to
exploitative.
reason, though. It's part of the whole LA mythos in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Right. So one of the most high-profile sort of mysterious locales that you've discussed in that context and others was, and it continues to be, the infamous Cecil Hotel, which has been renamed today, I know.
The stay on Main.
Not going to happen.
No.
But in your research, what were some of the most dramatic incidents in the Cecil's past history? Not necessarily today.
Right.
We'll get into that, but in the past.
God. I think, one of the ones that I think is the most famous and sticks with me the most is in the early 60s, there was a woman named Pauline Otten who was staying at the hotel. It was already pretty run down by then. It had really been pretty run down since the Depression. And they say she was fighting with her husband in an upstairs hotel room, and she either jumped or was pushed out of the window. And when she fell, she landed on an old man who was just minding his business, walking on the street below, and he died. So they found the two bodies together, and at first they thought that they had jumped, hand in hand, some kind of double suicide pact. But they were able to figure out that she had killed him when she jumped because his hands were in his pocket and his shoes were still on. I mean, so it didn't just affect her, it affected everyone. So that's one of the stories I find really disturbing.
That is disturbing, because what are the odds of something like that?
Oh my
Very
God.
slim.
Well, and I mean, you would read, I found so many stories of somebody fell in the marquee, somebody fell in the window awning on the hotel next door. It was like people were just, sounds gross, but like splattering like all over the perimeter of the Cecil from the 1930s on.
So strange.
It's so strange and creepy.
It really is creepy. But I'm going to move on for now, but we'll definitely get back to the Cecil. We're
Okay,
gonna touch on
good.
that. But I want to briefly get back to another mystery that's long haunted a lot of LA residents.
Oh, but can we talk about Goldie Osgood?
Okay.
At the
okay.
Cecil?
Another Cecil story, please.
Okay, this is
Please,
another
go
Cecil
ahead.
story.
Yes, I want to hear it.
Also in the 60s, a lot of older pensioners lived at the Cecil because it was very cheap. It was near downtown, so they had amenities nearby. And there was this old retired nurse named Goldie, and they called her Pigeon because she loved to go feed the pigeons in Pershing Square.
Okay.
And so she was kind of beloved in this very rough neighborhood. And she was murdered in the Cecil Hotel, in her room. She was raped. I mean, it was a terrible murder. And her murder was never solved.
Wow.
And I found this really beautiful story, like a few days after she was killed. All the kind of, very poor, marginalized people who were her friends in Pershing Square had gathered around to just buy a little bouquet of flowers to put in the square where she had always stood.
Wow.
Because, even in that kind of grim atmosphere, a community kind of
That's really
fosters.
kind of touching.
It is.
But sad also.
So, and they never found out who did it. I'm sure it was somebody who lived there, too.
Probably.
Yeah.
So you have people taking their own lives and taking each other's lives under those grim halls. of the
Grim
Cecil
hallways.
Hotel. Yes. So I want to move to another mystery. Speaking of grim, that's long haunted LA residents. It's the brutal so-called Black Dahlia murder of Elizabeth Short.
Right.
But you've actually written about a separate killing that's occurred only a month after, or thereabouts, right? That was the lipstick murder.
Yes.
Right, and the killer in that case wrote, I believe, "Fuck you, BD." Is that correct?
Yes.
So BD, many people think, refers to the Black Dahlia. Do you think that there's some sort of connection in this case? Can you give us any of your thoughts or background?
Okay, well, let me do this in two
I know it's
parts.
complicated.
Yeah, the lipstick victim was named Jean French. And something in my research I find really sad is Jean French had this amazing, very, very LA life. She was raised in Texas and she became a nurse. And then she became a pilot in South America when she was a nurse, flying she worked for an oil company, I believe, was the nurse for the oil company, and would fly from derrick to derrick and tend to the people who worked on these derricks. I mean, it's just cool stuff. And then she came to LA and she continued to be a pilot, and some people say she was kind of a socialite and she was a bit movie actress. That's a little undocumented, but she had this she was written up in the papers in the early 30s for her flying nurse, skills. And then she kind of fell into what I think was probably a really bad alcoholism and ended up, kind of a barfly in Los Angeles in the 40s. And like a typical alcoholic, her last night was really muddled. She went to a lot of different bars in LA. A lot of people saw her. She had just had a huge fight with her husband, who was probably an ex-army guy who had probably been suffering from PTSD, and he had beat her up, and she was saying she was going to commit him and all this stuff. And then she was found, was it the next morning or very shortly after, dead, bludgeoned. Her face was unrecognizable, and the killer had written in lipstick all over her nude body. So there's certainly a lot of similarities between her killing and the Black Dahlia's killing, and 7 other women who were killed in LA in the late 40s. And I believe you're going to have Steve Hodel here.
We are indeed.
Yes.
Next week.
Well, Steve Hodel will tell you all about his theories about his father being the killer of both the Black Dahlia and Jean French.
George Hodel.
Yeah,
correct.
George
Yes.
Hodel, the doctor.
Dr. George Hodel,
Who lived in Soden House in Los Feliz, the crazy Mayan home on Franklin, if any of you live in Los Feliz.
And apparently threw crazy orgy parties, but we're going to hear a
With
lot
John
about
Huston
that.
and
With John Huston,
Man Ray,
and other prominent artists of the
Right.
time. Very interesting stuff there. So does he figure into the lipstick case?
Well, a lot of people think that George Hodel killed Elizabeth Short and Jean French and all these other women. And it makes perfect sense. She was seen a lot the last night of her life with a man who's described a lot as dark and kind of elegant looking, but then sometimes he's also described as unkempt. But a lot of the way he's described matches George Hodel or who they think was his accomplices, demeanor and appearance. And it makes total sense when you really think about it, because in a lot of ways, even though Jean was a middle-aged woman and Elizabeth was really young, they were both kind of these lost women who would have been very easy to take advantage of, to ply with things, to promise things. So I can totally see it
Right.
having been the same person.
Now, the actual MO of the killing is slightly different, however, right? The actual way of death.
The way of death was different, and there is a lot of theory that it could have been a copycat killing because it was already known that they were already calling the Elizabeth Short thing the Black Dahlia.
Right.
And there had been actually a couple days before, the Examiner had run a fake story saying that the Black Dahlia's killer had been caught because they had decided that that would so upset the ego of this maniac who had killed Elizabeth Short that maybe that would make him make some false move and give himself up.
I see.
So a lot of people thought that Jean's murder was maybe a revenge for pretending that he had, that he had been caught and he wasn't getting his due as a murderer.
Interesting. Thus perhaps the expletive-laden message to
Right.
the Black Dahlia, perhaps meaning a more sort of proverbial Black Dahlia, the one that was being taunted in the news, the tabloid.
Yeah, but what's also interesting is that, like, I believe Kim Cooper of Esoteric also says a lot of people think it wasn't BD, but PD.
Oh, PD.
And also written on
Police
her body,
department.
police department, which also would tie in if it was somebody
Either
mad.
way, yeah.
And that the word Tex was scrawled across her body. And a lot of people think that must have something to do with the fact that she was from Texas.
Possibly.
So was that George Hodel or the Black Dahlia's, whoever the other killer was, or was it a friend who knew her from home or somebody from her past? Because she had husbands
Right.
and a whole other life.
It's a fascinating story and one that's little told compared
It
to the
is,
Black
and
Dahlia.
it's so sad to me because she was a really cool lady, and now she's just kind of this footnote
Right.
to the Black Dahlia.
I guess that's one of the more disturbing elements of any kind of famous serial killer is that many of their victims who led full lives
Mm-hmm.
are reduced to their status as solely victimhood.
Well, and
and
if
their
you
humanity is stripped.
Yeah, and if you see, if you look at Peg Entwistle, the woman who jumped off the Hollywood sign, she was a suicide victim, not a murder victim, but she had a whole great career in New York and Boston. She was like a very legit stage actress. And she came to LA, it didn't work out, and she killed herself. But now she's known as this tragic, failed actress ingenue, who's this symbol of, the sadness and the futility of,
Right.
trying to make your dreams come true, when actually she was a much more successful actress than a lot of people could ever dream of being.
Right.
But we don't remember that anymore because that doesn't suit the narrative
narrative.
of tragedy.
Very sad stuff.
It is sad.
But you and people like you are reclaiming some of that.
Oh,
so that's
thank
good
you.
with your work and finding the facts behind these mysteries. That's what we're trying to do with the show in general. So
Awesome.
Good stuff to know. But on that note, through all of the tours that you've conducted for the Obscura, Atlas Obscura, what to you is the creepiest and eeriest spot in all of Los Angeles? Ideally something we haven't mentioned, if possible.
Okay, well, I have several. I do a tour of Evergreen Cemetery. I love cemeteries. Bill Clinton also loves cemeteries.
Interesting.
So I think I'm in great company.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I love reading tombstones and headstones. It's my favorite thing to see what people say about people. And the best place to go for that is the Westwood Memorial Cemetery, where Dean Martin and Billy
Right.
Wilder and Marilyn Monroe's there.
Okay.
But Farrah Fawcett's there, and all these guys, like Jack Lemmon, they all clearly tried to out funny each other on their epitaphs, and they're hilarious. If you want to be happy and go to a cemetery, go to Westwood. But at Evergreen, one of the first crematoriums in LA is there. And you kind of peek through this fence and you can see it. It's in the very back of Evergreen, which is very, kind of parched and a sad cemetery. And it's where they bury the paupers to this day that nobody claims and they don't know who they are. Homeless people who happen
Right.
to die on the street or something. And it's just so eerie looking back there and thinking thousands and thousands and thousands of people are just kind of dumped
It's a mass
back
grave,
there.
essentially.
Essentially, they kind
I
of
mean,
say
it's
it's not. They say they very respectfully kind of stack.
Partition
Yeah,
or whatever.
but I mean, it's just creepy, in a real visceral sense of these forgotten people. And also, on another cemetery tip, again, I love them, but I like being outdoors. The mausoleums at Hollywood Forever, if you actually walk in them, they smell like death. And they're so empty and you feel so alone in there. And, outside, especially at Hollywood Forever, it's such a scene and it feels
Yeah.
so alive, and all these people have their monuments and are getting their due, and you can watch a movie,
Right.
you know, you can get a churro or whatever. And then you go, you know, even where Valentino's buried, which I don't think is open to the public anymore, but it's just like dank and silent and just eerie, and you just think about the bodies in there, and it's so creepy.
That is creepy. Places to plan your next trip out there, folks, and you know, leave a Yelp review for
Yes,
the mausoleum.
exactly.
Right? Smelled of death.
The Inglewood Cemetery Mausoleum too is super
Oh, really?
creepy.
I'm
All
actually
of them.
I'm gonna check these out.
You
Sounds
should.
Great. Sounds, well, not great, but fascinating.
It's fascinating.
For people of this macabre sensibility. So you'd say that those would be up there.
Those are up there. You know, and also don't feel bad about being macabre, because to me, like, looking at the dark makes things lighter. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
examining dark, creepy stuff, to me, like, makes the world, if you embrace it and admit that that's maybe your mindset about life, then it actually lifts you up.
Definitely, I agree.
Do you know what I mean?
I agree. That's why I love horror. That's why our whole, I'd like to think our community of people watching likes horror and all this stuff, is
Yeah.
because it does kind of lighten things at the end of the day by looking into the darkest recesses.
Right.
You know? So, speaking of dark recesses, we have a lot of them to go over, but the Cecil, we got to go back. Maybe that should be the title of the show.
Dark recesses.
Dark recesses.
Sounds like a fucked up kid show. Oh, shit.
No, we can curse.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I want to take it back to the Cecil.
Okay.
That's the draw, the Cecil Hotel. It's such
Mm-hmm.
a big deal and has become increasingly more of a big deal in recent years. You know, we showed a little clip and a blurb about the Elisa Lam case.
Right.
Now, Lam was, of course, the Chinese student who checked into the Cecil only to mysteriously disappear without a trace. I think she was from Canada originally. Days later, she was discovered decomposing in the hotel's water tank. Then there's also this famous video of her in an elevator speaking to someone or something
Right.
off screen, acting really weird and erratic. What's your take on all this as someone who's familiar with the backstory of the Cecil?
You know, I get asked about her, I think, more than like anybody there is. There's a lot of different theories. I think she was mentally ill. I think that's been established that she was mentally ill. But I also think, and I've heard rumors, that there perhaps was some kind of cover-up. I don't know if that's true. And that, you know, because the thing that was so uncool about the Stay on Main, and I don't know if they're still doing this, was that they were telling, you know, tourists, this is an affordable, great little boutique in the heart of downtown LA, when really it's like on a transitional street, like between Skid Row and the heart of like new, cool, hip LA. And so people were coming there not realizing that there were other people still living in parts of the hotel that weren't the Stay on Main, that might have, you know, also been mentally ill or had drug or alcohol problems. And so a lot of people I've spoken with think that maybe somebody from the other side of the hotel, you know, got into the Stay on Main, because apparently it was pretty easy to go into the corners, and maybe lured her. Because I mean, if you look at that video when she's looking in and out of the elevator, it does look like she sees somebody.
It certainly does.
Now that could be a delusion. If you believe in ghosts, that could be a ghost. Or it could be somebody staying in the hotel. You know, Richard Ramirez lived at this hotel.
Right.
Jack Untwinger lived at this. Is a hotel of serial killers. People who are bad probably want to stay there. So I think there's a plethora of different theories and what could have happened, and it's just a tragedy no matter what.
It does seem, you know, it's like there. Obviously, it can be explained away with mental illness, but there is, of course, that coincidence factor that's hard to overlook.
Yeah.
Okay, she is a mentally ill person who may see delusions, but what are the odds that she happens to stay in the murder hotel?
Right.
It's like the creepiest possible place, and that, you know, it's like you got to factor that in there. So
Yeah.
Maybe there is something going on.
I mean, there could be, you know, I don't ever want to say I don't believe in ghosts, because then they'll come and get you.
Right. Actually, that factors into my next question. Okay. So that's a great segue point.
Yeah.
And then we can keep it on. We can still talk about, you know, Elisa Lam, you know, but it is about the supernatural, you know.
Right.
Do you believe in it? Obviously, it's easy to explain things away logically, but do you think there's anything to the idea of, you know, energy in spaces, or, you know, the remnants of you know, lost spirits and souls?
You know, that's a complicated question. Like, again, I'm a superstitious atheist.
Right.
So, like, I don't believe, but I also don't not believe. And you walk into the lobby of the Cecil Hotel, even though they've tried to kind of do it up to look vaguely hip, but really it just looks like they've put, like, plasterboard over whatever's creepy behind. and it feels like a creepy place. I mean, it feels like there's some kind of trapped energy there. And you walk by the Soden house that's associated with Hodel and the Black Dahlia, and it feels creepy. Now, I don't know if it would feel like that if I didn't know the stories behind it. And I do think that there's sometime a place does have some kind of remnants of energy of tragedies or sadness that maybe don't have any kind of... I think that it's more maybe just a kind of organic thing. It's not actually like something in the air or like a vortex of evil or anything. I think that just maybe you're drawn, you know how you might, why do you drive by a house and you see one house and you say, I want that house? You know, I mean, I think...
Ineffable kind of thing.
Yeah, like I think, but I don't really believe in ghosts, but I don't want them to come and see me either.
Right. You know, it's like, yeah.
What do you
feel
think?
I feel largely the same way.
Yeah?
I think, you know, it seems like it's very hard to document them. Most of the people who make a career out of documenting them never seem to get the kind of, you know, it's like you see these shows about hunting for the supernatural. If there was real definitive proof, that would be biggest news in the world,
right.
Front page of every newspaper. You know, it's like, I think but I do believe in the idea of energy, you know, because obviously there is something to our realm of existence that we aren't able to perfectly quantify.
Right.
Otherwise, the mysteries of death would be solved. So, you know, maybe there is some kind of connection.
Well, and also, like, I think a lot of time these legends, we go back in time to find reasons for things that are happening in the present. Like, going back to the Colorado Street Bridge, you know, the suicide bridge in Pasadena. You know, I found this old article from the 30s when, you know, over like 30 suicides had already happened off the bridge, saying, oh, the reason for this is there's this curse because, you know, this old Mexican woman, when this was, you know, part of Mexico, sold her granddaughter to an old man, and the granddaughter didn't want to marry him, so she jumped off the arroyo where the bridge is and fell to her death. And then the grandmother went crazy and haunted the arroyo where the bridge now is, you know, searching for her lost granddaughter. And so I think a lot of times, like, ghost stories and legends actually spring up from stuff that, like, we as people, we cannot deal with the fact that something's happened in our present.
Yes.
So, you know, like the Kennedy curse, like, so then you go back and find all the other terrible things. And really, if you go back into the happiest person's Ancestry.com, you're probably going to find a lot of, like, weird, creepy, sad shit because life is weird and creepy and sad.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same angle of, you know, if you look at something long enough, or if you look at it with your perspective colored in a certain way, you'll find the connections, or you'll find what you're looking for to prove the point of view you're after. But at the same time, you know, it seems like when a lot of things happen in one spot, it makes it harder to just sort of logically explain. The Cecil is a perfect example of that. The sheer amount and volume of
never
horror.
seen anything like it.
Right.
I've never come across more violent stuff at any location I've ever studied in my career as a historical journalist. Never. Just like suicide after suicide, murder after murder. You know.
Unbelievable.
Crazy.
Guys, you know, check in at your peril, at your own risk.
I would never go there.
No, I would.
I would never stay the night there.
Good to know.
Never.
I'll take it from you. You're the expert.
Not a ghost hunter.
Okay, so what do you think on this larger, you know, sort of taking a bird's eye view of all this, what do you think draws us as a society to be so interested in this kind of the events that are eerie and morbid, and why do we have this need to seek out things that disturb us the most?
Well, I think because if you look at something that you find scary, then it's not as scary. Like if you facing your fear or whatever, say what's the worst thing that could happen? It's, you know, being found in a water tank 3 weeks after you've mysteriously died. If you really like think about that, then you can not almost, sorry, I touched my mic. You can almost like not, you can divorce your emotions from it somewhat if you flatten it and make it into a narrative. And I think that's part of it. And I think also, I think people are fucked up. And I think we're interested in other things that are messed up. And I think people have messed up thoughts and messed up, you know, ideas. And you want to see other people or things that were like you. And also, I think so many times, you know, I'm from North Carolina. So, like, the story and the history of the graveyard of the Atlantic and the Outer Banks and the ghosts that haunt the beaches and stuff, it's a way to feel connected to wherever you are. When I first moved to LA, I hated it. And then I started really getting involved in the history. And, you know, even examining a murder, you find out a lot about the place you live. Because you find out, oh, what lot was the Black Dahlia killed at? Oh, that's interesting. Like, what was life like for someone like Elizabeth Short, who was barely scraping by, who came out here, you know, to kind of make something of herself in the 40s during the war.
Right.
So it's kind of a way to learn about yourself and your history, and also like get a little thrill.
Thrill, certainly.
A little like, you know, thrill, a little jolt, a little adrenaline rush.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
I agree with you. I mean,
Yeah?
you know, I'm an aficionado of horror movies, horror TV. That's what we talk about oftentimes, and definitely, I mean, it's all about the adrenaline, the thrill, gets your blood pumping, the scare. I think there's also something comforting to it in a way. I think there's something comforting to the idea of, specifically in the supernatural, or things that are outside, or even unsolved crimes and things like that. I think, you know, it's like when you look at that kind of a darkness or something that's outside the realm of the banal, and, you know, the doldrums of everyday life and the sort of monotony and the average problems that we come up against, you know, paying rent and, like, you know, being on a diet, that kind of boring stuff. It's like, it's easy to be distracted from that by ghouls, monsters, serial killers, etc.
Right.
You know.
Have you ever heard of Winnie Ruth Judd?
No, I'm not
The
familiar.
suitcase murderess?
No, please.
Because you said horror, and you talked about your horror show.
Enlighten us.
She was this little, frail, like, beautiful blonde woman. People said she looked like the movie star Norma Shearer from the 30s, who lived in Phoenix. And she lived with these two other women, then she moved out, whatever. Well, she and maybe someone else ended up killing them and chopping them up. And she brought their bodies in a bunch of suitcases to the Central Station in Los Angeles before Union Station was built, and there they found the bodies. They opened it up and they found them, and there was this huge this was in the 30s or 20s, there was this huge manhunt for her. And she, like, hid out in one of the department stores downtown, and they finally caught her, and she was declared insane, and then she kept escaping from local prisons until she was let out in the 60s. I wrote about it in LA Weekly. It's a fascinating, like, really gruesome story.
Why did she bring them here?
Nobody knows.
So she's
her brother lived here. He was at school, I think, at USC, and I think she thought, like, he can help me throw them in the ocean. Like, she had a psychotic break. And she was like, I can. But everyone who interviewed her after was like, she was the sweetest woman. Like, she was so, like, kind and meek, and she snapped. She snapped like the show.
That's a great show, by the way.
It is a great show. I love it.
That's an awesome one. That's a great story. See, she's just a wealth of this kind of information.
You know,
you're an expert on this. That's why this is the type of people that we need to talk to here on Dark Times, to make our times even darker.
If the times aren't dark enough.
Right. Well, actually, that segues very neatly. You're really good at that. You've nailed the segues perfectly here, because what will unfortunately be my final question has to do with the idea of, is there anything recently in these dark times, a recent case or mystery that you've become tuned into? Is there anything that your average person may not have heard about in the past few years that's occurred in LA or wherever else you might have information?
Well, I mean, I think this isn't that recent, but 2003, the Phil Spector murder of Lana Clarkson. I'm really fascinated by that, because to me that kind of encapsulates, like, the story of Los Angeles, like success and failure colliding, and it's, you know, success that swallows up the failure, sort of.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article about the Pyrenees Castle in Alhambra, which is where Phil Spector lived and where he murdered Lana. And it's just, like, the most fascinating, you know, he lived there, like, with his iguanas.
Right.
And people would just see him speeding through the neighborhood with his wig on. And
insane.
Yeah, and Lana, like, was willing to go up to that castle, even though she told the limo guy outside, like, I only want to stay for one drink. Like, so she clearly felt creepy about it. But, you know, this was a guy who could maybe help her with
Phil
her career.
Spector, for people who don't know, legendary record producer.
The Ronettes.
You know,
Wall of Sound.
Wall of Sound, right, exactly. And
pulled a gun on Leonard Cohen.
Yes. Well, who hasn't? And then Lana, right?
Yeah, Lana.
She was a sort of a B-movie actress, right?
Yeah, she was in Roger Corman movies and stuff.
Cool.
But then she, you know, didn't have work for a while, so she was working at, like, the foundation room of the House of Blues on Sunset, which used to be
and
there.
That's where he
used to go there all the time, and she was a hostess. And so he met her and was like, oh yeah, come hang out at my Pyrenees castle in
Right.
like Alhambra.
Didn't
She
end
did
well,
it.
sadly.
No, it was awful.
That is tragic. Now, is he dead or is he standing trial?
He's
Is
in
he
jail. He was, I think, convicted after the second time. But the weirdest part was he met some young girl during the trials, and she married him. And for years, she was living at the castle, like protecting his memory all by herself.
Wow.
With the iguanas.
Very creepy. Very disturbing stuff indeed.
La La Land.
Well.
Day of the Locust.
The Day of the Locust.
That's what
exactly.
LA is.
That's
It's
what
the Day of
LA
the
is
Locust.
all about. Okay, I want to thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been just an amazing opportunity to discuss all this stuff with you. I think that's all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, hopefully we can speak again in the near future, but we will be continuing this dark and deep dive into the realm of unsolved mysteries. We'll be here next week discussing some of the details of the Black Dahlia murder case, hopefully. As usual, I've been your host, Dash Finley, and this has been Dark Times. Thank you all and have a great weekend.